Good evening, everybody. How are you all out there? And once again, it's 6 o'clock Central Time, at least on Tuesday night. And it's time for Think Differently Academy's Facebook Live. And I am eagerly waiting. Polly quickly ran to do me a favor at my request, knowing that she might be a few minutes late. And I'm trying to see if she's going to jump in or if I am solo with you guys tonight. So I'll let you know as soon as I know that. But in the meantime, we continue to be in a series called Cultivating Culture, where we're really talking about, in our mind, the things that our culture needs to maintain a sense of cultural health and well-being, healthy relationships, healthy communication, all the kind of things that I wish would come from our more visible leaders, and or I wish that we were more visible, just in the sense that I think it's such a crucial time in our culture right now that with both the pandemic and the things that have gone on politically over the last number of years, that I think there's such an increasing amount and increasing intensity of division and anger, frustration and pain and all those things that I think we've got to have some leadership in the area of really just what do we have to do to stay healthy and physically healthy, mentally healthy, emotionally, relationally, spiritually healthy. And unfortunately, we have a lot of people offering direction in terms of behavior. Should we do this? Should we not do that? Should we vote this? Should we not vote that? But very little in terms of what do we need to do to keep ourselves sane and to grow the strength of our culture instead of erode our culture because of frustration and confusion, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, I need to switch over to chat. Without Polly, I'm doing what's normally hers, and so she just said she's going to go solo. So I'm going to get kind of center here. You'll get our printer if I do that. So I'll just move over and say hi to everybody. Hey, Heather and Abby and Belinda, David, Susan, Beth, David again, different David. Oh no, same David. Then Michelle. Good. I'm glad to hear, Michelle, that you help your coach with your clients with that. And Cassandra is there. And then Thinker is with us. Thinker, you may have to remind me who you are. But in the meantime, so we have been talking for several weeks. Hello again, Betty, Deborah. We've been talking then for several weeks about what it is we really need to help people grow in, gain, develop. Whether we're looking at a difficult cultural event like the end of the Afghanistan war, or whether we're looking at the natural disaster of a hurricane and the follow-up from that, whether we're looking at the political fallout where we've got people divided on two sides of a very intense ongoing political war, and whether we're looking at a pandemic and all the various not only effects of the pandemic itself, but then the way that people have become divided. We have got to be able to grow together and grow healthier instead of weaker and stronger instead of weaker. And so we spent some time talking about handling conflict and communication and really talking about, how do all those things happen in such a way that we develop strength in relationship instead of being continuing to be eroded by that. Annette, I see that you've got some painful stuff going on again, so we're very sorry, and we always pray for you when you give that stuff. So April from South Carolina, good to see you. So tonight we want to make a turn from the last 2 weeks where we've talked about handling conflict and where we've talked about handling, what's the word, good grief, my mind is, at the end of a Tuesday day of clients, my mind is a little bit slow finding some words. So where we've got division and polarization was 2 weeks ago, and then last week, just the general principles of handling conflict. I want to make a transition in that. One of the things we've talked about both in the polarization series or episode and the one on conflict last week is the importance of really managing our own emotional state during those conflicts. We've got to recognize, as I always say, put a finger on your pulse and recognize, when am I getting into my brainstem? When am I operating out of anger or fear? Because anger and fear set us up for the greatest potential for manipulation or propaganda. And so we've talked a little bit in both of those sessions about really how to stay out of our brainstem. Tonight, we're going to make a transition when we talk about managing our emotional health. And tonight, we'll talk about one of the very specific foundations of that. But notice that when it comes to those two previous types of communication, dealing with conflict and polarization, in order for us to really handle those things the way we talked about, we have to be able to be less reactive in a given setting. Now, here's how I want to say that, and you're going to hear this as you're going to hear this again throughout the evening. But part of how we have to be less reactive is we've got to not just stay out of our brainstem, which is the goal, but we also are trying to be sure that nobody else owns the control of our own emotional state. You know, we want to have the freedom to, even in the face of pain, even in the face of intense conflict, intense disagreement, and the dissolution of relationships, we want to be sure that we stay in full ownership of our own mental and emotional state. The dilemma with that is a lot of people struggle and think, well, I got angry because this person did that, or I got afraid because this person said that. And we don't always understand our own emotional states and our own emotional in the way that our emotions work. By the way, this is one of the reasons why we're doing the events coming up in October called Outsmart Your Heart, our event on emotional intelligence, and then one called Healing the Heart That Keeps You Hooked, on recognizing the emotional component of compulsivity. And so those two events are really designed to help you really get to know the makeup of the human soul, particularly the emotional element of it, and gain control over your own being, whether it be about compulsive behavior like addictions or compulsive thoughts or compulsive actions, or whether it be about simply in relationships maintaining a stance of emotional intelligence where we maintain control over both our own being and therefore over the ways that other people can no longer provoke us. One of the things we talk about is that, you'll see this if you do that event, we'll go into great detail about this, but most people think that their emotions are a response to the events around them. First step is being aware of your own emotional state. Absolutely, Beth. In fact, I'm gonna really talk for a minute about some very specific things about that. But first, I want to say this: because people often think that our emotions are a direct response to circumstances or events, we leave out the key step and one of the things we have the most control over once we understand this step. And here's what it is. In between the events that we experience, the circumstances we experience, and the emotional response we have, even if it's just for a split second in between the events and the response, something happens in our perception. So the way we teach this in the emotional intelligence event is there are 4 steps in the healthy processing of emotions: events, perception, emotion, and expression. And it's the perception one that a lot of people miss, because sometimes that perception is either pre-existing or it happens so quickly that we don't realize the emotions are not a response to the events, but the emotions are a response to the internal conversation or internal belief that we have about those events. So we're walking down the street and we see a dog walking towards us. And if we are not afraid of dogs, then what's going to happen is, the internal conversation is, we're happy about seeing a dog coming towards us. But if we see a dog coming towards us and we are afraid or have previous negative experience with dogs, then the internal conversation tells us something bad might happen, and the resulting emotion is fear or anxiety. So the key is to realize it's not our circumstances that drive our emotions. It's what we tell ourselves, whether consciously, unconsciously, or in some pre-existing form, what we tell ourselves about the event. Yes, Susan, event, perception, interpretation, event, perception, emotion, expression. So those are the 4 steps. You want to go deeper with that. We'll talk about that in great detail in our event coming up in October. And I will put that in the comments afterwards. Since there's only one of me doing this tonight, I won't really have the chance to put it in the comments. And so, we're live, but I'll put this in the comments on Facebook afterwards so that you guys can do that. Event, perception, emotion, expression. You got it, Susan. There you go. Those events, by the way, are listed on the Think Differently Academy site under the heading events. So we've got to first of all realize that our emotions are a response to thoughts we have or beliefs that we have, not to the circumstances that we have for so long attributed those emotions to. Now, having laid that foundation, I want to give you what I think is an even more important foundation and really our primary topic for tonight. You'll see that Mandy just put the link there for the events. Thank you so much, Mandy. I appreciate that. If you want to take a look at those events and perhaps register for them, it's still time for an early bird price. And so you can click on that link that Mandy put there and go register for those events. And so, yeah, Beth, I saw you signed up. Super excited when I saw that you signed up for that. I get an email on my phone when people register just because I'm attached to that part of the website. And so it comes straight to my phone. Yeah, I was super happy to see that you had signed up. So let me zoom back then and tell you why it's so crucial and really what's the core of all emotional health. We've taught this in a number of different settings, but tonight I really want to focus in on this as one of the key things that I think we've really lost in our culture, not only because of recent events, but I think we've been drifting this direction for quite a while. And that is, I'm going to state it simply at first, and then we'll spend the rest of our time together this evening really developing these thoughts. At the core of emotional health, and I often say mental and spiritual health, and I still would say that, but for tonight, the focus is on emotional health. At the core of emotional health is this movement that we're all designed to make from dependence to independence. And that movement that we're designed to make from dependence to independence, unfortunately, we often think about that in some classical terms that I'll describe in just a minute, and we miss the important subtleties of what it really means to move towards independence and develop emotional and mental health. So the classic terms that I think of is a dependent child is one for whom the parents do, they put on their shoes, they dress them, they feed them. A dependent child is one that the parents do for them everything that gets done for them. And an independent child is one that moves to a place where they manage those simple details of their life, everything from getting dressed, combing their hair, brushing their teeth, putting on their own shoes. All of those things, whereas a child moves from being managed by their parents down the process until they become fully independent adults. I'll say something about that in just a minute. That's the continuum of dependence moving towards independence. And the foundation of emotional, mental, and spiritual health is to move towards independence in as full a way as possible. Here's why that matters so much. We've described dependence versus independence so far more in terms of the simple provisions of life, i.e. tying your own shoes, dressing yourself. Ultimately, towards your late teenage years and early 20s, you also begin to pay your own bills, ultimately pay your own housing and living and transportation, all those kind of things. So we move from, not just the tasks of life, but the financial provision. But one of the things a lot of people don't realize is, many of the developmental processes of the human soul are chronologically or biologically designed. So biologically speaking, there are certain processes the body goes through at a relatively predictable rate. Emotionally speaking, however, there is no biological trigger that moves us into independence. There are biological triggers that move us towards independence, but ultimately, each one of us has to choose to make that leap from dependence to independence, in particular in the emotional realm. Reading Beth's comment, the core of emotional health is movement from dependence to independence. I think I get it, from letting culture outside forces to dictate emotions and reactions versus controlling my own emotions and responses. Exactly. When we make that movement, not just in terms of dressing ourselves or feeding ourselves or even paying our own bills, but at some point, let me finish the thought. I have so many thoughts happen. At some point, we have the option of moving from emotional dependence to emotional independence. Again, we can talk about this in terms of a child who emotionally, the parents teach them how to comfort themselves. The parents teach them how to, or don't teach them how to regulate their own emotions in such a way that they know how to process emotions internally and externally in a healthy way, helping them bring down a sense of anxiety and increase a sense of internal peace. When you learn that in your family growing up, here's what happens. That move towards independence says, I alone, listen carefully, I alone am responsible for the emotional states that I experience and that I maintain. And instead of saying, I'm angry all the time because of what's happening in the political realm, I'm angry all the time because of what's happening in the social realm, I'm angry all the time because of whatever it might be. And what we have to understand is at some point, if we don't say, I'm angry all the time because I've not learned how to manage my anger, I've not learned how to regulate my emotions, then we're at the mercy of the world around us to be in control of our emotional states. So as long as we remain emotionally dependent, we believe at some core level that something outside of us must change for us to be happy, for us to be satisfied, for our unpleasant emotional states to come down and our pleasant emotional states to go up. And so we come to believe that we're waiting on either other people or other circumstances to change so that we can move from unhappiness to happiness, from lack of success to success, from whatever state we weren't in to the state that we think we ought to be in. At some point, it's our job in the process of maturation or becoming mature. It's our job to become self-managing emotionally. Now, listen, there are circumstances that happen outside of our control. So when I talk about success and becoming self-managing, I'm not talking about you're in control of everything. What I'm talking about is you're in control of you in every state, in every moment, in every circumstance. So you see a difference between people who go through a crisis and they're devastated by it versus people who go through a crisis and their legs are cut out from underneath them, but they start looking for help and they start looking for solutions and they start looking for what are the things that I need to do to move on from this crisis, whether it be getting help from the outside or whether it be kind of regulating your own emotional states. And the difference is a dependent person says that a crisis can turn my life upside down and I have no say-so about what I do or how I respond to that crisis. An independent person says, a crisis just happened. What do I do? How can I help me? And if I can't help me, what help can I seek out? And it's that the difference between a dependent and an independent person, David, you've got the key word right there, and that is the issue of responsibility or responsibility. An independent person has the ability to respond. A dependent person can only react. So reactivity, that emotional kind of quick reactivity that happens, whether you're driving down the street and something goes wrong, or whether you're in a conversation with somebody and they offend you, or whether you read a post and it really triggers something inside of you. That reactivity is a sign that you maintain an emotionally dependent stance or belief system that says, my emotions and my way of being entirely depends on the outside world. So if something happens, I have no control about what happens inside me. Listen, one of the things, again, that we'll teach in our emotional events in October, sounds so funny, our emotional events, where we'll have all the emotions. No, our emotional intelligence event and our event on helping understand the emotional role in compulsivity, something you can't stop. You want to lose weight. You want to stop drinking. You want to start a habit and you have a hard time maintaining it. What's the role of emotions in that? That's the second event in October. And so one of the things that people a lot of times don't realize is that if I simply think all I can do is react, I've got that reactivity, then I'm actually am a victim of the outside world. Why? Not because you actually are, but because your belief keeps you chained to circumstances. Emotional independence then says, If I'm responsible for my emotions and I don't like the way that I felt in response to that, I need to go back through my 4 steps of emotions. I need to look at my own history and I need to sift through why I responded that way. And if I don't want to respond that way in the future, it's up to me to figure out how to do that differently. This is so crucial because I've been a licensed counselor for just under 30 years. I've actually been practicing counseling for 30 years, but some of that was an internship. And so once I was licensed in 93, I lose count. Once I was licensed in 93, I've been a licensed counselor since then. I did an internship for 2 years before that. So having done this for 30 years, here is the key distinction between people who can really move quickly through the counseling process or the freedom process versus those who really, really struggle through the process. People who have already made the transition to independence. And I don't mean just that they pay their own bills. I know a lot of people who pay their own bills, but they do it because of the poverty of their parents. And because of that, they've reacted to the poverty of their parents, and they've become better at managing money, which is a good thing to be, but they've become better at it simply because they're still reacting to the circumstances they left. That reactivity is a sign of emotional dependence. The people who still live out of a dependent paradigm feel that they are either they're the victim of or their life is dictated to them by their circumstance. It's difficult to help people like that in a counseling or freedom setting when they feel that so much of their own life and circumstance and response and emotional state and mental state that they really can't do anything about it. The ultimate state of dependency really leaves people in a state where they feel completely powerless about their emotional and mental states. And that being the case, then, when people maintain a sense of dependency, it's very difficult to help them with circumstances. The first thing you have to be targeting isn't their circumstances, but their belief system that says, I am the victim of the world around me. The clients who work most quickly through things and the clients who are the most effective at working through things are those who come in with already a relative strong sense of independence, realizing that the counselor isn't there to do for them the work, but rather to guide them in the work that they're there to do. As long as people believe the counselor's work is to do the work for them, A, counseling is not very effective, and B, that's an indicator that they're still operating with a dependent mindset. Where does this movement from dependence to independence come from? Well, it's clearly rooted in family of origin patterns where people learn early in life whether or not they can affect change in their own world, where people learn early in life whether or not they'll pay consequences for both positive or for negative behavior and reap benefits from positive behavior. Parents who parent their children simply by managing their behavior and using punishment methods only seldom give children a sense that they have control over their circumstances. Whereas when we learn to give children the opportunity to make choices and reap the benefits of those choices, that allows them to have a sense that I can impact the world and I can impact my circumstances both positively and negatively, and therefore I more quickly develop a sense of independence. I can make a difference in my life. As long as the parent believes that their job is to manage or control the child's behavior until they're old enough to leave home, they'll actually leave home still needing someone to control them. But when we allow our children to have more and more and more control, listen carefully, not just over their circumstances, but more and more control over making choices and reaping the consequence, positive or negative, over from those choices, what happens then is those children learn, oh, I am the one who makes my life either work or not work. So family of origin patterns where children are protected from negative consequences, or where parents don't allow them to experience either natural consequences or imposed consequences, then those children don't really learn the difference between, or don't really begin to make the leap into independence. I've seen people still in their 60s and even in their 70s who are 100% dependent still and live their lives only in reaction to others, assuming that they're completely dependent on people. And by dependent, I mean my life won't work if other people don't change to make it work. Listen, again, I want to emphasize sometimes there are circumstances outside of our control. So when we talk about dependence or independence, we're not saying that we can control all things. What we're saying is we have mastery over our own soul, over our own thought life, over our own emotional life. And regardless of what circumstances, whether they're in our control or out of our control, what's always in my control is my sense of being, my emotional state, and how and when I act, react, or respond to the world around me. Listen, think how crucial this is. If somebody posts something on social media or says something in a public forum, and you immediately react to that, and in your reaction, it's kind of like two super balls just hitting each other. Next thing you know, you've got just kind of this energy that's out of control and chaotic because one person's acted out of whatever their emotion expression is. The other person feels a victim or feels like they can't do anything but react instead of take the time to internally respond and then be able to respond out of a rational process like we described in the last 2 weeks. Listen, in the days ahead, we're going to talk more about emotional intelligence and kind of build you guys toward those events in October. You want to dive deeper with some of these concepts, really do. Go back to the link that Mandy put up for you, events@tdacad.com. And you're going to find that both of those events in October are designed to give you more control over your soul, over your being. There it is again. Thank you, Mandy. And over your ability to not feel that you're victimized or controlled by the world and circumstances around you. The movement from dependence, where I depend on other people to take care of me, provide for me, protect me, make my life work for me, to independence, where I come to know that I'm the one who influences my internal world. I'm the one who makes choices so I can react instead of respond. Respond instead of react. So that I really have the ability to manage myself, especially when people around me are not managing themselves. The more we develop the capacity to do that, the more we can create health, not only internally, but then in our relationships around us. This is one of the things that we'll get to both in those events and on a Tuesday night class somewhere in the future, is talking about emotional health in relationships. But that sense of emotional independence says I provide for myself, I take care of myself, I manage myself, and I'm responsible for the outcomes of my life. To the degree that we learn and take responsibility for the outcomes of our life, we have increasing control and power over that. Listen, sadly, and I'm going to just kind of land us here, sadly, not only have we, I think, increasingly over the decades moved toward a culture that fosters dependence instead of independence. What do I mean by that? Well, let me give you an example. Even in the area of, for instance, insurance, now a dependent in terms of insurance is no longer defined by age 21. They're defined by age 26. Culturally, we've given a 5-year extension to the place where we are literally described as dependents because the expectation is we're trying to give that child an opportunity to grow into a place where they can provide for themselves and pay for their own insurance. So even culturally, literally, legally, and in terms of insurance, we describe people as dependents, with a T, not a CE, as dependents all the way now to the age of 26. Some of you guys out there remember when the age was 21. And, it has to do with cultural shifts where we see that people were not providing for themselves. And so the insurance companies extended that age to 26 rather than the culture adapting and trying to train people to become more independent at earlier ages. Here's the last thing I want to say about that. Culturally, we also often promote policies that foster and grow dependence instead of independence, where we don't help people develop the concept of responsibility, but rather we help people foster the idea of who will take care of me, who will protect me, and when will I get taken care of. The more that we create consumers in our culture where people are expectant that whether the government or institutions or other agencies are going to take care of us, the weaker emotionally and intellectually and mentally and even spiritually a population we become. We must help people recognize that their strength as a person, and therefore our strength as a culture, is that we help each person learn to manage their own life mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially, and relationally. As we start to do that, we can find more and more people being a healing agency in the culture instead of waiting to consume from the culture, and instead of giving to the culture, waiting to take from it. Listen, this is the foundation of everything else we'll talk about in the next couple of weeks when we turn our eyes to emotional health. Without the sense of emotional independence, we'll always live under the assumption that the world is in control of us and we can do nothing about it. Stay with us over the next couple of weeks. I think you're really going to find that this stuff can be life-changing. It's why we're doing 2 events on it in October. So check out the events on tdacad.com. Click on the link that Mandy's posted in the comments and join us for those events. By the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, go down and hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and I guess what else do they say? The notifications. I always forget to do this. If you're watching but not a subscriber on Facebook, please do like the Facebook page and do all the things. That helps you not only get notified, but it helps it get into the algorithm so that more people get information about these courses. So thank you guys so much for joining us. And next week, we'll continue the short part of this on emotional health and emotional intelligence. And you'll get a bit of a preview of what we're going to be digging into in deep in October. See you guys then.